Hello my dear students, and welcome once again to another video for our class in object-oriented programming. In this video we'll be implementing some object-oriented code by creating user interface within Swing, and specifically we'll be focusing on layout managers. These are classes that allow you to position your components properly in a Java Swing application. And after that, we'll also be implementing some event handling, specifically action event that occurs when you click on a button, so that you can now start building usable Java Swing applications. Let's get on with it. So here we are in our Visual Studio Code editor in a blank folder. I call this folder layout and action event. I'm gonna first, of course, create a class. This will be our main class. We'll call this main.java, and this is the one. Oops. And this will be the one that will have the main method. And so also we create our frame, and this should be extends JFrame, and we'll have our constructor here. Actually, I think we need to rename this to main frame, right? There you go. So let's set up some things first. That's the title, my app, we'll also have a size, set size. So I'll just have a 400 by 300 size for this, and we'll put it in the center by calling set location relative to null. Okay, and for now, that's all we have to do. Let's just check if this is going to come out. So in our main method, we're simply going to instantiate a main frame and set it to visible to true. Okay, and we can now try and run this code. And yeah, here we go. Here's our window. Alright, so the first layout manager I will be talking about is the border layout. The border layout is the default layout for a JFrame. So here we are using a JFrame, and the default layout for this is the border layout. Now the border layout uses some areas, or identifies some areas in the whole container. You have to remember that layout manager can be applied to a container, and JFrame is a container, but aside from JFrame, JPanel is also a container. And so you can create a JPanel and put it inside of a JFrame, and that JPanel will have a border layout. So it's going to be using that whole box by the of that JPanel and divide it into areas. So basically, there are 5 basic areas, but of course there are now additional areas that are identified in a border layout. But basically there are 5. The north, which is the top part of the box. The south is of course the bottom, and then the west and the east are the sides, and the center. So let me demonstrate you this by putting in some buttons into our mainframe. So let me first create a button. This will be our top button. So we call this north, just so that we can identify. It's easy to identify the area that is being used by the border layout. Again, I didn't have to change any layout manager, because by default, mainframe or JFrame uses the border layout. So let's just copy this and change things up. This will be for our bottom button. So this is in the south. We'll have the west. Oh, actually, let's say left, and this is for the west. And this will be for the center bottom. Alright, so we have our 5 buttons instantiated. Now let's add this into our layout. And since we are using border layout, the way we add items or components into a border layout is that we pass in the component, and then we also identify what area we are going to put that component into. So for example, to add the button, we simply say add, and then top button, and then we comma identify our location or the area where it is going to be placed. And to do that, we call upon the border layout class, and this class has a constant, a public static constant that is going to identify the location, and it is in this case north. So we need to also import our border layout class right here, and it's found in AWT. Okay, so we'll also just copy this. So for our bottom button, the location is going to be south. For our left button, our location is going to be west. For our right button, the location is gonna be east. And finally, for our center button, we can either say border layout at center, but also we can leave it blank there, because by default, the default location for a border layout is the center. So if you are not going to identify which area you are going to put this particular component, it is going to be placed in the center. So now that we have that, let's take a look at our program. So this is how border layout reacts. You see, the top part occupies the topmost area and will occupy the least amount of area for its height, whatever is only required by the content, but it is going to occupy the whole width. So as you can see here, this button is occupying the whole width, but only what is required in terms of its height. Now for the west and the east, they have the same behavior, only the difference is the location. They will occupy the width that is required only by its content. So this particular button only requires this width, and so it's occupying this part only. So look at east, it's only occupying this. If for example this button has a longer name, for example, this is not just east, maybe say westward, it could be a larger width here, because that is what is being required by the content. So that's the behavior of the east and the west. And then the south is similar to the north. It occupies the whole width, but not the height is only based on how much the content requires. So north and south will have a varying width when you resize. West and east will have a varying height when you resize, and the center will take up all the remaining space. So that's the um, behavior of border layout. So let me show you, if we are going to change this label of west, say westward next, a very long label. As a result, you'll now have uh, a larger width for this button compared to the east, because the east only requires this width, but because of the long label for this west button, now the west area is being extended a little bigger. So that's the behavior. And when you resize, it just simply adjusts. That is border layout. The next layout manager we're going to talk about is the flow layout. In a flow layout, the components are going to be arranged just like when you're typing text on a text editor, such that every character follows another character, and at the end of the margin, the next character is going to be added or placed below it. In some cases, the text editor will wrap the text according to words, so the last word that will not fit on the right margin will be brought down to the next line. So basically, that is the behavior also of a flow layout. And to demonstrate this, I'm gonna remove all this adding here, and first we need to change our um, layout manager for our frame here, because as I've said, by default the JFrame will have the border layout as the layout manager. Since we are going to change this to flow layout, we have to uh, execute this command, or have this statement that's saying on not add set layout, and here we're gonna instantiate an instance of flow layout. So we say new flow layout. You can have it like this, and here we'll change our import to flow layout. Now you can also instantiate a flow layout with spacing between components, and there are two types of spacing: the horizontal spacing and the vertical spacing. For example, we would like to have a uniform spacing of 10, then we can say 10 comma 10. That means horizontal spacing of 10 and vertical spacing of 10 for the components inside this flow layout. But however, there's an error. Let me check back. We have alignment. Okay, so we have to first there's a alignment first. And then our spacing. So now we can add our components inside. We say add. This time we don't have to tell any area where we are going to put it, because it's going to be the work of the flow layout manager to arrange the items according to how you added it. So if we are going to start with adding on the left button, okay, followed by the right, then maybe the west, actually the top, and then the bottom, and then the center. So these components will now be added into our available area according to the order they are added in, just like when you're typing a text. So when we run this code, So it's gonna look like this. Now you see, if we are going to have a larger width, that center button is going to be placed beside the south. But as you can see, when we have a smaller width, the components will simply adjust according to the available area that they will have. Okay, so that is the flow layout. The next layout manager I'm going to introduce to you is the grid layout. With the grid layout, you are going to identify how many rows and columns will the layout be, and every time you add a component is going to be added on each of those grid items from left to right, top to bottom. Okay, so to demonstrate this once again, we need to change our layout manager to grid layout here, and this time we're going to identify how many rows and how many columns. So for example, we are going to have 3 rows and 3 columns, or maybe just 2 columns, and then we can also add spacing between components, which is again horizontal spacing and vertical spacing. You may also create or instantiate a grid layout without spacing, but I'd like to have spacing in between. So let me change this to grid layout. So again, here we set our layout manager to grid layout, and then we added our items. So now that we did do this, the left button will be placed in the very first grid, followed by the right button, followed by the top button. And then the fourth button, which is the bottom button, will be placed on the next row, because we only have 3 columns here. And then in the next row, that's where we add the bottom button and then the center button. So when we run this program, we have something like this. Oh, actually, nabali. We have 3 rows and 2 columns. So when we added the left button, that's where we put there the left button, followed by the right button, which is on that same row, but the third button is on the second row on the first column. Now if we exchange this to 2 instead, and here 3, it's gonna be looking a little different now. We now have 3 columns and 2 rows. And you see, this adjusts quite well. So those are the 3 basic layout managers that I want to introduce to you. And using those 3 layout managers in combination with each other, you can come up with a very nice layout, which is will create a new layout that is going to be using a combination of these layout managers. To demonstrate the use of multiple layout managers in one application, we're going to create this user interface here. As you can see, it's a little bit complicated, and you cannot imagine to be using one single layout manager in order for you to come up with an user interface that looks like this. Now, as you can see, you can divide this into groups, and by dividing this into groups, you can identify that the base or the main layout manager is actually border layout. For example, this part here is the north, right? And then this part here is the south. Okay? And on the other hand, this one here is the west. And finally, this one in the center is, of course, the center, right? But if you are going to take a look at here, the north, there are actually 2 components here, because you see this is a label and this is another label, because it's using different font size than this one. So there are 2 labels here on the north, which means that this is not any this is now inside another layout manager, and obviously the top uses another layout manager, which is flow layout. As you can see here, we have two components side by side, and also the one in the west contains 5 labels, and they are arranged like so. This is probably in grid layout, wherein there are 5 rows in one column, which is also similar to this one. So the one in the west and the one in the center have the same layout, 1 column and 5 rows. The one at the bottom, on the other hand, also uses a grid layout, but this time 1 row only and 4 columns containing the 4 components. So let's build this out in code and try to take a look at how we write this in a Java program. So we go back into our Visual Studio Code editor, and this time we're gonna remove all this, and we'll probably be importing more than one. So we'll copy this, and this one will be for the flow layout, and also the border layout. All right. Now, for the main, this is using the border layout already, but I will create a new border layout instance that I will be using for the main, because I would like to add padding, or the spacing between each area. So I'm gonna say set layout, new border layout, and we'll have some spacing of 10 horizontally and vertically. Okay. Now, based on this, let's remove all the markers that I made. So first, at the top in the north, we're going to add a panel. So we have to create a J panel. A J panel is a container, okay, which can also be assigned with a layout manager. So we'll call this top panel is equal to new J panel, like so. We also need to import this, and inside of that top panel, we're going to put 2 labels. So we're going to create J label. I'll call this title, and this label will have a content of, what's that again, my application. And this label will have a larger font. Let me import that as well. So we can change the font of that label by calling title, which is the instance of the label, dot set font. And inside of set font, we create an instance of the font object. We can say new font. Okay, we also need to import this from AWT. So inside of a font, we can create, we can identify the name of the font, the style, and the size of the font. So here, the name will simply be Arial. The style is font.normal. Oh, is there a normal? Plain. Okay, plain. And then we'll have a size of, say, let's try 24. Okay, and it should be double quote. All right. Now we also have another label. We'll call this subtitle label, and it will contain the content, the struggling programmer. Just like that. And now we can add, I'm so used to writing JavaScript code. Alright, that's why I always use single quote for the strings. Now we can add both the title and subtitle into the top panel. So we say top panel dot add. First is the title, then top panel dot add the subtitle, and then that top panel is what we are going to add in the north of our main frame. So add top panel, and we say border layout dot north. All right, so we can try this out now. Let's see how it's gonna look like. And there we go. Okay, next is we're going to do the west. Let's do the west. So again, we create a new J panel. This will be called the west panel or the left panel. And this particular one will be using grid layout here, and there are 5 rows in one column. So left panel, that's set layout, new grid layout, and we'll have rows first, so we say 5, and then columns 1, and then we'll give it a spacing of 5 pixels each. Okay, so inside this left panel, we're gonna define 5 labels. So we'll have J label, and this is data 1 label. And I think it's better to put this inside of an array. So we'll have an array of labels, so it's easier. Data label, and we'll have 5 of them, so that we can just loop for each, and simply set the text. No, actually we need to instantiate. So we say new J label, and it's gonna be having data and then space. Actually we need to use the I for int I equals to 0, I is less than 5, and I plus plus. And we say here data label I is equal to new J label, and we have I plus 1. Right? And after instantiating, we can also add it immediately to the left panel. So left panel that add data label I. Okay, so that's how we populate our left labels. And let's add now our left panel into the main window. So simply add left panel, and when we identify it to be added on border layout dot west. Okay, let's try this out and take a look at the output. And there we go. Next, we're gonna add the center one. So for the center, it's basically the same here. So we create. Let's just actually, since we'll be accessing the content of these guys, the text fields, we have to define the text fields outside of the constructor. So let me first just copy this and paste here, but here this is going to be called center panel now. So center panel, and instead of defining data labels here, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I will do that, but it's not going to be a declaration and definition. It's just instantiation. We call this fields. Okay, so this is new, and the fields is a text field, so j text field. So fields is equal to new the text field, which is an array. We have to define this outside of our constructor. So here we have j text field fields, and this is an array of fields. You also need to import this. So we have our text field imported. So it's declared there fields, and we instantiated it. Fields is equal to new j text field with 5 elements inside, and then here we simply say fields I is equal to new j text field instead, without content, like so. And we add on the center panel, we add the fields I, and then after that we add into our frame center panel, and we don't say what area because it's going to be placed in the center. Okay, so let's take a look. And there we go. Next we put on the bottom part, and the bottom part is another j panel. We call this bottom panel, and we'll set the layout to border layout. Oh no, grid layout still. A new grid layout. This time we'll have 1 row and 4 columns, and we'll also give 5 spaces for horizontal and vertical. Now we can define our buttons. So just like the text fields, we are going to define our buttons outside of the constructor so that it will be accessible by other methods. So we'll have JButton, and we'll have the buttons that we have are sum, average, clear, and randomize. So we have sum, btn, av, btn, clear, btn, and rnd, btn for our buttons. Of course, we need to instantiate it here. So we'll have sum btn is equal to new JButton, and this will be sum. And we'll just copy this. There are 4 of them. Next is AVE BTN for average. Then this one is clear BTN for clear. And the R&D BTN is for randomize. And then we can add them into the bottom panel one by one. Let's add. First we start with sum btn, and of course we can just copy this. And next is the AV btn, clear btn, and R&D btn. Finally, we are going to add the bottom panel into the south of our main frame. So add bottom panel, and we say border layout dot south. Okay, and as a result we now have this. Boom. So exactly what we wanted. And we are going to compare our output. So they are very similar. Okay, now let's do something here. How about how we can implement the button click? So by design we should have some values here, 3, 3, 2, 2, 5, and when we click on sum, it should display the sum of these values. So how do we now handle the events? Let's, in this example, I will just be handling the sum button for this. So to do this, we are going to use event handlers uh, and to event listeners as well. We already have defined our button, so we'll be focusing ourselves on the sum button here. And with the sum button, we can create a listener that is going to listen for the sum button, and that listener is going to have a method that is going to be called when that listener will be able to hear a button click from the sum button. And to do this, there are plenty of ways to do this, but I'm going to show you one simple way of doing this. It's by creating an inner class that is going to be the listener, will be an inner class that is directly assigned to the sum button. So to do this, we simply say sum btn and then set add action listener. Okay, and inside of here is going to be a listener, but instead of creating an instance of a listener, we are going to define a listener inside here, and that will become an inner class. So we can say new action listener, like that, and we define the code inside of that new action listener right here. We need to import this. So at the top, you could say here import java.awt.event.action listener. We also need to have to import the action event. Why is this an error? Okay, there you go. And also we need to import the action event. All right. Why is border layout not used? So now the error now is because we are not giving it a method which is required by the action listener, and that method is action performed. So we only have to do is create a method here, public void action performed. This is the action that will be created or will be triggered when you click on the event. And inside of this method, we are going to pass in a parameter called action event. Okay, so now all the errors go away. And now inside of here, we can execute the method. So we'll just call a method that is going to do the sum. So simply say sum. Of course, this method is not yet created, so we'll create that one outside of our method of our constructor here. So we say private void sum, and that's the reason why we declared our buttons and text fields outside, so that sum in this case now can access those. So first, we are going to get the values of the text fields. Remember that the text fields are or were declared as arrays. So we can get the text fields value, convert it into int. That's because the text fields value are string. We need to convert it into integers and add it. So first we'll have an int sum here, which starts with 0. And now we can use a for loop the same way we did earlier. And inside of this for loop, we're gonna get the value of the text fields. Remember, the name of the text fields was fields, and then and now we can say get text. So this is the method that is going to get the text value out of the text field, and we need to turn this into an integer. So we have to put this inside of integer dot parse int, and we put that there, and we can assign that as an integer. So This is going to be value. And all you have to do is increment this value into the sum. So you say sum plus equals value. And that's all there is to it. Now at the end of the loop, we get a sum. And all we have to do is display that sum into, well, we can use a J option pane message box for this. So we can say J option pane that show message dialog, and we simply have null for component, or we can say this for the component. The this here is the parent window, which in this case is this class, because this class is a frame. And so next we can simply put our message, which is the sum is, and then we add in the sum value. Now J option pane is not yet here, so we are going to import that, and the error goes away. Now this might result in an error. The error that is going to result here is number format error, because we're trying to change the text into an integer. So if the user types in a non-numeric value in one of the fields, that's going to trigger an event. That's going to trigger an error. So we can put this inside of a try catch. So let's remove this and say try, and catch. We're going to catch number format exception. And here we're gonna display a message again, but inside of the try, that's where we put our for loop. And this one is gonna be inside of here. But if there's an error, we can display another message, and we could say you must enter a number in the fields. So just to give the user a heads up of what's wrong with it. So that's our sum. Now let's try and run our program. Let's see if this works. So we put here 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we click on sum. It says the sum is 15. But if we put something else like that, click on sum, it says you must enter a number in the fields. So that worked, and we now have a working application. Of course, we can also do that for average, clear, and randomize. So that's it for this session. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again in the next one. Bye bye.